All right, guys, this is gonna be the easiest pickleball paddle review that I've ever done. In fact, let me just show you how easy it is. Selkirk Labs Project 003, and it is officially the thickest paddle on the market at 20 millimeter. Not only is it the thickest paddle on the market, but it's one of the... Okay, I'm joking. It's not exactly the same as a 003, but there are some similarities that we definitely need to talk about. The Control Air can be purchased for $249, and if you use code ADV-PBStudio, you will receive a $30 digital gift card sometime after your purchase. This is a store credit gift card and not something that will get applied to your current order. It has a 20mm polymer core, carbon fiber face, plus paint grit for the texture. Comes in 3 shapes, the S2, Epic, and Invicta, and in this review, I'll be talking about the Invicta because I did not have the other 2 shapes prior to release. On the Invicta, it has a 5.35-inch handle length, 4.25-inch grip size, weighs between 7.8 and 8.1 ounces, has a swing weight of around 114, a twist weight of 5.75, and RPM of 1895. It also comes with a lifetime warranty. Before we talk about all of the performance aspects of this paddle, I think it's important that we talk about the similarities of this paddle to the 003. I'm sure from my intro, you can already conclude that I think they're pretty similar. As many of you may already know, the Luxx Control Air is the official release version of the 003 that will fall under the Selkirk line, similar to what the Power Air was to the 002. When I first started hitting the Control Air, I immediately noticed how much more solid it felt than the 003. It didn't have that tingy, hollow feeling nearly as much. It feels more robust and solid than the 003 out of the box. The swing weight was also higher at 114 compared to 105 on the 003, which is probably what contributes to the paddle feeling more robust. My immediate thought was that the Luxx may just be a 003 with the weight shifted into more strategic locations to enhance pop and power. If you recall, the biggest complaint about the 003 was that it was too light and needed lead tape to add power and stability. Most people who played with one added lead and really enjoyed that setup. So my hunch is that the Control Air is not much more than a 003 that had lead on it. I even tested this. I took my old 003 and added lead from the throat up the sides to get the swing weight to 114, and the paddle played very similar. Identical? No, I wouldn't say so. However, it was similar enough that I don't think I could have called one definitively better than the other. I think it's important to understand this to set expectations properly for the paddle. The 003 weighted up was a really solid paddle, so having the Control Air be similar out of the box is also a good sign for the paddle. However, if you owned a 003 and were expecting a massive change, I don't know that's what we necessarily got, assuming you played your 003 with lead tape. Based on everything I've said, you can probably imagine I don't have a lot of new information to present to you about the Control Air when it comes to control and power, since it's basically a modified 003. I will say, after using so many power paddles this year, I had forgotten how much easier something like this is to control. I felt like a reset machine on the court, and doing a drop from the kitchen while my opponents were at the baseline were considerably easier than most paddles I've played with recently. In fact, one of my favorite things to do with this paddle was to lob people, make them go to the baseline, hit a drop, and then make it look like I was going to speed that ball up or, push it back to the baseline, and then just drop it. And it worked fantastic, and I probably can't think of many paddles I've used this year that it was easier to do that with than this. I just felt like I could get the ball to go where I wanted without having to be as conscious about my grip pressure. Now, the flip side of that control is that as someone who has a hard time generating power, that was only exaggerated with the Control Air. I'm not gonna pretend like you can't generate any power. It's more than a stock 003, but if you come from a thermoformed paddle, you may be a bit disappointed in the power. The more frustrating area for me was counters at the kitchen line. Since it just doesn't have a ton of pop, I just felt like my opponent would consistently get the better of me in hand battles. A lot of people's paddles expectation is based around what they have already. If you come from a softer paddle like a Vatic Prism Flash, you probably won't be too concerned with the power of the Control Air. However, if you play with something like a Carbon 1X, you may find that it's a really large change and that it lacks power. So anytime you watch a review, try and remember the context of the paddle you're coming from, because it's likely going to influence how you feel about the paddle. The twist weight of the Control Air is still fairly low, coming in at 5.75. While overall it feels much improved out of the box compared to the 003, I still felt that the edges of the paddle were more jarring than I would prefer. Whenever there's an edgeless paddle, you can usually expect the sweet spot isn't going to perform as well as one with an edge guard because of the perimeter weighting that the edge guard adds. I don't think it has a bad sweet spot, but thermoformed paddles have truly spoiled us when it comes to sweet spots. The energy return of those paddles is so much better than most non-thermoformed paddles on the market. As you can probably guess based on my sweet spot comments, I still feel like this paddle needs lead tape, which in some regards is a bit disappointing. With the swing weight being increased by 10 points, it doesn't give you as much room to experiment with lead and still have really fast hands. You still have a fair amount to mess with, just not as much as the 003. I decided to use my exact same lead tape setup from the 003 on the Control Air, and I found that my complaints for the sweet spot pretty much went away. But with how many people didn't want to add lead to the 003, I wonder how many are gonna do it to the Control Air when it has a higher swing weight out of the box. After adding this lead, my paddle went up to a 7.19 twist weight and a 119 swing weight. So the twist weight got a significant bump and the swing weight also went up quite a bit, but it's still not unmanageable. While I usually prefer something in the 114 range, with the Control Air, I would rather have this lead setup than the slightly faster hand speed. I just felt like this lead tape setup really bumped up the stability on the edges, which I found more desirable than having the faster hand speed. Now, I want to be clear, I'm not saying the sweet spot is horrible without lead tape. In fact, a lot of you are going to find the sweet spot to be a massive upgrade from a stock 003. But in my opinion, if I'm going to use this as a reset, drop, and block machine, then I want even more stability than what comes stock. If I were personally switching to this paddle, I wouldn't be using it to have insane counters or super fast hand speed. I would probably be a right side player trying to keep my teammate in the point. I'm not saying that's how everybody's going to use this paddle, but that's how I would personally be using it, and that's why I would choose to add this lead to the setup. While the RPMs of mine were very solid at 1900, they're still using a paint grit on the Control Air, and as far as I can tell, durability does not seem to be improved significantly. You'll hear from one of my testers who really enjoyed the Luxx in just a second, but we recorded his talking section a few weeks ago, and I asked him while writing this review how the grit was holding up. He said he still feels he can generate plenty of RPMs, but that the sweet spot area was definitely wearing down for grit. I don't think this is a surprise to anyone because paint grit has never lasted a significant amount of time. If you've used a Power Air or 003 in the past, you can likely expect a similar longevity here. Also keep in mind that my friend is a 5.0 plus player and is going to wear down the grit faster than the average player.
So I came from the Carbon 1X, and I would say that that paddle was by far the most powerful paddle I've used. And then jumping to this, I was honestly expecting to hate it. I played with the 003, and I think if you like the 003, you'll still like aspects of the 003, but I think they've really improved on it. So first thing is, I think it's a little bit more head heavy than the 003, which I really like, and it doesn't feel as hollow. In terms of power, I know it says Control Air. It still has enough power to where if you can create your own power, you can put the ball away for sure. It's not a dead paddle. It's not like a Gen 1 carbon fiber. I feel like it has more pop than that. And the really good thing about it is the sweet spot is huge. I feel like the sweet spot is probably the largest, especially for an edgeless paddle I've played with. And if you jump from the Power Air to the Control Air, it's a massive leap, I would say. I'd say overall, the resets are outstanding. And then I would also say that, like, in terms of dinking, you can put a lot of spin on the ball similar to the Power Air, but you can keep the ball shorter in the kitchen because it is a little bit softer. And it feels like you don't get as many miss hits if you're not moving your feet as well because the sweet spot's so much bigger. I'd say overall, paddle is definitely good for anyone that has enough power on their own, but is looking to soften up their game, whether that be resets, dinks in the kitchen, but still wants to be aggressive on high balls. I would say the one thing I noticed that improved the most right away was just my backhand roll. It was like once you got the ball, high enough to attack, you could really get the ball up and down pretty quick with the paddle with enough pace, but you're not skying the ball out like I would with my Carbon 1X. Overall, I think it's gonna be a great paddle for most people, and I'm sure it'll be pretty popular.
The Control Air is a good paddle, but it's good in the same way that the 003 was good once you added a lot of lead tape to it. So I suppose that the Control Air is better for the masses because they may not feel it needs the lead as much as the 003 did, so less people have to customize it to make it usable out of the box. However, if you own a 003 and already have a good lead tape setup, I don't know if you'd feel this is a big upgrade, or even an upgrade at all in some ways. At first, I was disappointed that the Control Air wasn't more different, but I had to realize that the 003 was already a really nice paddle once you added weight to it. And that's effectively what Selkirk seemed to do with the Control Air. I think the only thing they could have made better out of the box was the stability. But when it comes to edgeless paddles, I just feel like that's an inherent flaw of them. Without the perimeter weighting that the edge guard tends to add to paddles, I just feel like you're gonna lose some of that stability and you're gonna have to add it back with lead tape. So who is this paddle for? It's for those who want a great control paddle and either don't care about power or they can generate plenty of their own. If you pride yourself on drops, resets, and dinks, this paddle is awesome. But this paddle's not going to be for people who can't generate their own power, like to play aggressive, or if you're very budget conscious. While the Control Air is an awesome control paddle, you also have to consider that you can get nearly 3 Vatic Prism flashes, which would last longer for grit and also be a fantastic control paddle. I would also mention that if you really enjoyed how fast the 003 felt in the hand, be prepared for the Control Air to feel heavier. A near 10-point increase from the 003 is very noticeable and may not be something that everyone appreciates. If you guys enjoyed this review, make sure to let me know down in a comment below, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.